Hello and welcome back to Western Washington History. If you are traveling in the mountains and the hills of Western Washington, it's not uncommon to see a logging truck or two, either helping you go faster down the hill or possibly nearly running you off a dirt road as you come around a corner. All kidding aside, there's been an intimate connection here with logging for over 200 years. Washington is the second largest lumber producer in the United States. Lumber is still king here in the backwoods of Washington. The methods have changed and the need for lumber has grown. Enough backstory. We are here to talk about a man and a company that changed the game, not just here in Washington, but all across the United States. The Michael Jordan, so to speak, of the logging truck industry. Theodore F. Peterman came to the United States from Germany in about 1872. He settled in San Francisco, which was the largest city on the West Coast at that time. After living there for a few years, he traveled north to Tacoma, Washington. Tacoma had been founded in 1872, so it was still a young town at this point. During this time, he worked in mills and furniture factories, honing his future trade. Yes, this video is about Peterbilt trucks. It's coming. Theodore F. bought a 20-acre farm for $400 just outside of Tacoma city limits. He married Catherine Corcoran in 1887. He sold the farm in 1889 for $8,000 and opened his own business named Peterman Manufacturing Company. This building was located at 2533 Jefferson Avenue. Peterman Manufacturing made doors and window trim. Theodore F. and Catherine had their first child, a daughter named Olive, in 1890. T.F. Peterman, owner of the year-old business, got the contract to supply woodwork for the first state capitol building. It was being built as the Thurston County Courthouse in 1892, but ended up being used as the state capitol building from 1905 until 1928, when the current building was opened. This building remains today and is used for the office of Superintendent of Public Instruction. In 1893, they had a son named Theodore Alfred. They raised their children and the business did well. The son, Theodore A., who I will call Al from this point on, worked in his father's factory before he got out of high school and after. He would work there on and off. Al mostly went out on his own and tried starting a few businesses, one being a scrap metal business. The story goes that once Al's dad needed logs for his door business, and Al found some trees, bought them, and resold them to his dad for a profit, but still a good deal for his proud father. Al married his wife Lida in 1915. They were married until his death. In 1916, TF got the contract and did the woodwork for the State College in Pullman, Washington, seen here. Al Peterman and his wife lived at Ingleside Apartments in 1919, located at 515 North 2nd Street, Tacoma. These apartments were the first large complex in Tacoma. The building is still there and was renamed in 1993 to the Bayside Apartments. Theodore F. unexpectedly passed away in 1920 from cancer of the liver and gallbladder. At the time of his death, Theodore F. and Catherine lived at 624 South I Street in Tacoma. He was in negotiations to do all the woodwork in the state's new Temple of Justice building at the time of his death. There is no word if the company got the contract or not. During this time frame, and before 1921, the business was moved to 1421 Puyallup Avenue, still in Tacoma. Catherine was now the sole owner of the business. She brought in her son Al to manage the business. Al was now 27 and eager to take the business to the next level. Al expected a housing boom to happen now that World War I was over. A housing boom meant many doors to sell. So he streamlined the process of making fur doors first so they could produce them at a maximum efficiency. They were receiving requests for more and more panel doors as plywood had become easier to produce and took less wood to make a door. So within a year, Al built a plywood and veneer plant. Remembering the roots of the company and his dad's dream, making doors would always be more important than making plywood. The company boosted its profits under Al's direction. In 1923, Catherine Peterman, owner of the company, paid the highest individual income tax in the whole state of Washington. She soon took Al in as joint owner. Al was always looking for ways to improve efficiency. His mechanical ability allowed him to improve on his equipment as well as make many innovations to the industry. The business had grown, as much as it could at the Puyallup Avenue site, so Al set off to look for a new home for Peterman Manufacturing. In 1926, he found the spot at 600 Alexander Avenue, still in Tacoma. He paid $40,000 for 25 acres. Here he built a new door plant and a plywood mill. The building was 350,000 square feet. That is 8 acres of his 25. And it was built in the shape of an L. It had all the modern conveniences like a sprinkler system in case of fire. Other buildings on the site housed the boiler plant, drying kilns, sawmill, and an office building. The plant was one of the finest in the nation. Master mechanic Ben Westbow and his team built many innovative machines for Al. One of these was a 125-foot span bridge crane. The door plant began producing doors 2 years after the plywood plant had started up. This was 1930, and the Depression had started the year before. I'm sure it was a scary time, as Al had dumped a lot of money into this plant. His door factory was able to produce 5,000 doors in an 8-hour day. As the Depression in the United States slowed down the construction of new homes, Al looked across the water. He began to sell doors to the UK. In 1932, he shipped 635,000 doors. During the 1930s, he managed to keep up the plant operating when so many businesses failed. Sometimes the door plant only ran a couple days a week, but he was able to pay his employees and make a profit every year of the Great Depression except one. He also sold equipment designed by Al and his team to other businesses. Al sold his doors, sashes, and wall panels to a wholesale business who would sell them to the public. Always looking to streamline his business, Al decided to buy some timberland and have his own wood logged for his business. During the winter of 1933-34, he bought land from the Northern Pacific Railroad near the town of Morton, Washington, on Cotler's Rock, or what is now known today as Peterman Hill. In a town of then 750 people, during the Great Depression, Al showed up in a Cadillac and hired somewhere around 100 people. I can imagine the celebration in the town of Morton. He hired Edward Baker to manage the logging operation. Baker had been procuring logs for Al for a while, along with his partners William and Victor Johnson. One reason he chose that location, in a state full of trees, was Morton was a railhead. A railhead is a point on the railroad where roads and other transportation routes begin. They had to decide on whether to get the logs to the rail by rail or truck. Truck logging was new at the time, and Al, being Al, chose truck, and I think any of us watching this are happy that he did. Al bought 15 retired Shell oil trucks made by the White Motor Company. In Tacoma, the machine shop crew set to work completely rebuilding the trucks. Al designed and patented a rear axle design that allowed both back tires to move independent of the other. That allowed the weight of the logs to remain constant on both dual wheels. This allowed for a faster speed in the trucks over uneven terrain. Other improvements to the 15 trucks were the brakes, which were converted to air brakes. New, more powerful motors were installed, and the tires that were solid rubber were changed to air tires. Some people would call these the first Peterbilt trucks. Well, they are certainly the first Peterman-built trucks. Sometime around 1935, Al went to San Francisco, California. While there, he learned that the faggy old truck company of Oakland, owing money, was being sold by its creditors. Al bought the 13.5-acre plant for $50,000 and named it Peterbilt Motor Company. The spelling of Peter, B-I-L-T, instead of Peter, B-U-I-L-T, was either the name of the doors manufactured in Tacoma or a misspelling. Either way, it has become an icon. Peterbilt was eventually incorporated and combined with the Peterman Manufacturing Company owned by Al and his mother. The West Coast was hit by a lumber and plywood strike in 1935. Al set up a tent in front of his mill for the picketers. He offered sandwiches and a keg of beer, along with some comfortable chairs. Even though working conditions were good, his employees had to show support for their fellow tradesmen who didn't have a good working environment. Although he was the owner, Al said he was on strike too. Building started to pick up about 1936 as the country started to shake off the Great Depression. It is reported that Peterman's cost to make a door was 30% lower than his competitors. In Morton, in the area known as Backstrom Park, Peterman and his friend Ed Valentine set up a small shop and set out to build a better log truck. They tried many ideas. In 1939, the first Peterbilt truck designed from the ground up by Al and Ed was the dual-drive, all-steel cab Model 334, along with a chain-drive model, the 260. During this time, Al invented a gear-drive truck with a drive line to the rear end, and Ed Valentine invented the rib-cooled brake drum. Peterman was known to send his engineers out to talk to regular truck drivers to see what improvements they would make to their trucks. This no doubt helped spur sales. The first truck to roll out of the Oakland plant in 1939 and bear the Peterbilt name was a chassis built for Hearst Fire Truck Company. It was sold to the Centerville, now Fremont, California Fire Department. Then came a 3-axle Model 334, which was sold to Garrett Beckley of Stockton, California. Sales in 1939 totaled 16 units, 2 Model 334s, 13 Model 260s, and 1 Model 120. Needing a vehicle for water shipments, Al set up a company called the North Pacific Steamship Company in 1940. He also bought a 70-foot yacht named the Pagan at the same time. By 1940, the timberland in Morton was all played out. The over 100 men who were working for Al had to find different employment. Al picked up more timberland on the Trask River near Tillamook, Oregon. He then set up a mill run by Jim Walby at Garibaldi, Oregon. A few weeks after the attack on Pearl Harbor in Hawaii in 1941, the federal government took over Al's Tacoma plant. They wanted to convert it to a shipyard to supply the war with baby flat tops. They paid Al $875,000 and ordered him out by June 1942. Also during the war at the plant in Oakland, California, Al produced 39 Model 365 trucks for the military. The only civilian Model 365 was built for the Snoqualmie Falls Lumber Company. In Tacoma, they removed a lot of the machinery and shipped it to the Garibaldi plant. Al was one of Tacoma's most respected businessmen. The city was sad to lose him. Al had already planned a big new plant near his timber on Lewis River. Peterbilt Motors tripled its sales in 1944 with 224 trucks sold. During this time, they only made the Model 334 and 354. Sadly, Al found out that he had cancer in 1944 and passed away at his home in November of that year. He and his wife lived at 3714 Northwest Washington Street in Vancouver, Washington. Al's wife, Lida, ran the business after his death until 1947 when she sold the company, but kept ownership of the land. In 1953, the rectangle Peterbilt emblem was replaced with the recognizable red oval with the word Peterbilt in the center. This oval has been on the front of every Peterbilt since. Lida Peterman decided to sell the land in 1958 to developers. Those running the plant were nearing retirement and sold to Seattle-based Pacific Car and Foundry, known as PACCAR. Peterbilt moved to Denton, Texas in 1980, where it remains today. The plant began as a 435,000 square foot facility on 80 acres with 81 employees and is now 238 acres, 2,500 employees, and 700,000 square feet of building space. In 1981, they once more shocked the industry by releasing the first cab-over truck. The Model 362 had the cab mounted over the engine to gain extra cargo space on the trailer due to a federal regulation limiting length. In 1987, the Model 379 was released and is still the most popular owner-operated truck on the road. Peterbilt continues to operate in Denton, Texas, and has a network of 400-plus Peterbilt dealerships. They produce 150 trucks a day. In 2018, they built their 1 millionth truck. The truck was a Peterbilt Model 567 Heritage. I know they ended up in Texas, but they are still owned by the Seattle-based PACCAR company, so they're still somewhat tied to Western Washington. Thank you for once again spending a little time with us. And remember, what you do today will be history tomorrow.